Good morning, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 14th, 2017. And this is Before the First Cup with Jules here on UCY.TV. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. It is a balmy 33 degrees and very sunny here in upstate New York. So, I read a little bit about St. Valentine yesterday, and I think I closed it all. But it was quite a gruesome story. He had been marrying Christian couples or something in the Middle Ages, and they didn't quite like that. I guess he tried to convert one of the Roman priests or whatever to Catholicism, and so they did all kinds of horrible things like chopped up. I don't know if they chopped him up or they chopped his head off. It said he was beheaded and all these other horrible things. And then they canonized him afterward. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I also wanted to say a big, huge, fat thank you. I know I don't do this as much as I should to all the listeners, all the people who comment, all the people who give really good comments, suggestions, links. I appreciate every bit of it. And I especially appreciate the people who help me keep UCY running. I figured Valentine's Day would be a good day to give thanks to those wonderful people. I want to give a huge thank you to Cracker. Thank you very much for all your help, Cracker. To Lone Frog. Lone Frog has been very supportive of UCY over the years. And to Hopper. Hopper's been helping us out. So this little project's there. You guys have been wonderful, and if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here, since it's not like UCY brings in the bacon, because it doesn't. It's a big sucking hole every single month. But as long as I can do it, I'm going to continue to do it. Let's just cross our fingers that none of us lose our jobs. Wink. It looks like it could be a possibility here. So we'll see, but in the meantime, I'll keep the lights on as long as I can. All right, so where do we leave off on yesterday? We titled the show, DARPA, AI, Brain Interfaces, Directed Evolution, and the DIY Singularity. Now, we looked at the very last story of the day was something that I was kind of excited about, and you don't typically see me get excited about the marching long arm of the law, but Germany had finally stepped up and said, wait a second, this body hacking, DIYing, CRISPRing the TARDIS in mommy's back bedroom just doesn't work out too well. Now the clapper has declared gene editing at WMD is probably not such a good idea. German was threatening biohackers with prison. It was a pretty hefty fine. I think it was like 50,000 German units, whatever they do money in now. I don't know. Are they even part of EU, or do they have a German? I don't even remember what the German monetary unit is. It's been so long, but 50,000 of those anyway, or 3 years, up to 3 years in prison. But interestingly enough, while I was doing research last night, I found out the FDA has also, I guess, jumped on board as of the end of January. January 31st, 2017. The FDA is cracking down on rogue genetic engineers. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Yay! David Ishii's plan was simple, if not exactly free from complication. From the shed that functions as his laboratory in Mississippi. Now, wait a minute. I missed a word. In rural Mississippi. Now, if there were ever words that gave you chills down your spine, those should be them. From the shed that functions as his laboratory in rural Mississippi. Come on. See, this is exactly why I have a problem with DIY gene hacking. There's nothing that you're going to be able to do to yourself in a shed in rural Mississippi that's going to make more than a difference in 10 minutes, okay? This is just so disturbing. Anyway, so David Ishii, in his shed that functions as his laboratory in rural Mississippi, hope to use genetic engineering to rid dogs, oh my God, of the types of terrible disorders caused by decades of high-end breeding. So we're going to do dog experiments in our shed on their genetics in rural Mississippi. Now, and hey, there's nothing wrong with Mississippi. I'm just saying, but it just makes me hear banjos, and I'm sorry if that seems to be a stereotype. But even when I'm in the southern tier of New York State, I hear banjos in my head. Not that I have anything against banjos or people who live down in areas where they like to play banjos, because I sure like to hang out down there. Just saying. Not a place for genetic DIY genetic engineering in your shed or mommy's back bedroom. Anyway, now on top of all the obvious scientific hurdles that David Ishii's plan out of his makeshift laboratory in his shed in rural Mississippi give him, Ishii now has a new set of challenges to contend with. Oh my God, that pesky FDA. Now, interestingly, 21st Century Cures Act was just passed in the end of 2016, and it kind of got that FDA sort of out of the way. I don't know, kind of combed his hair and moved him off, put a little smile on him, made him look all pretty, but FDA got rid of all those fangy teeth. They must have taken them out. So now it's pretty much rubber stamp. You know, look pretty, put on a bow, tell us you're going to do a clinical trial, and that you got a couple promising candidates. And they might let the desperate with money sign up for your clinical trial and see what happens when they try to people. They're not making them do all the due diligence before approval like they used to have to do. And remember, we talked about the FDA was no golden child to begin with. The FDA was still allowing drugs on the market that, you know, how often did you see commercials? Have you had a loved one, you or a loved one, die or have, you know, damaging results after taking XYZ medication? Well, you should be calling a lawyer. I mean, that still happens. But at least for the product to get to market, there had to be some sort of front end legwork, some animal testing. Not again, we don't advocate animal testing, but it's better than no testing at all. Little Susie or Johnny should not be number one. And it cost some money and application fees and all these other things before they got their approval. And that was just kind of, we'll see what happens in clinical trials. Anyway, Ishii is considered a biohacker. We talked about those biohackers. They cut little holes under their skin and put little sensors so they can, you know, wave their hand and have superpowers. Ishii is a biohacker, one among a growing number of do-it-yourself scientists that the federal government is having an increasingly difficult time figuring out what to do with. And, you know, so much for democratizing gene editing. Addagene sent out 60,000 copies of CRISPR across the globe to anyone and everyone who wanted a copy. And when they were doing that, we were standing on the rooftops going, yo, this is not such a good idea. But hey, we're democratizing everything now. They're just sending it all out. I'm trying to remember what else we were just reading about. Just all these crazy technologies because they want everyone to have as much equal opportunity for destroying the human race as everybody else, it seems. So, since the DIY bio community first developed in the early 2000s, has largely avoided government regulation, and we have read about a couple different scientists now, like that one that stabbed himself with a 3.15 million year old Russian bacteria out of Lake Vostok or whatever. I think he was a Russian scientist, so I don't know if he was here. But then there was also a CEO of some longevity company that had dosed herself up as well. I think hers was maybe telomere lengthening. But I found a third story, and we're going to work our way down this list. I did put some time and effort into this last night and tried to organize all these stories so they work in a nice flow for you. So we'll get there eventually. But I got to read so we can. All right, since the DIY bio community first developed in the early 2000s, it has largely avoided government regulation. But in 2017, cheaper equipment and simpler genetic engineering technologies, so even Susie could do it with her little easy bake oven, DIY gene editing kit at home. Get her one for Christmas. Means that garage scientists, ding, can dream much bigger than simply turning yellow yeast red. And I warned you guys about that too. They've been saying, well, yeah, these DIY gene editing kits in your garage. What are you going to do? You can mix up some E. coli and, make it eat different things. Maybe it'll eat this grain and that grain, but that's all you're going to do. Well, I have been questioning for a long time, especially if you have a little bit of know-how. Maybe if you don't know anything about CRISPR and gene editing, but if you have a little bit of know-how and you're devious, you got your hands on one of these little kits, you have a little space where no one's going to bother you. You have access to eBay, buy some centrifuges for $10. We've read a story about that. We had these DIY biohackers in their garage, and they bought everything that they needed right off of eBay for just a few bucks. It's a frightening world we live in. Well, we now live, and look, hey, we now live in a world where anyone can order custom DNA sequences on the internet. And I'm going to add to that are DNA laser printed, high resolution to tinker with in their homes. And the rules that govern genetic engineering today were not written with the foresight that it would be one day possible for a 30-year-old hobbyist in a shed in the swamps in rural Mississippi to try their hand at genetically engineering dogs. And that should be horrifying to every single one of you. Ishi joins the ranks of DIY biohackers after becoming frustrated with the limits of traditional dog breeding. He breeds mastiffs, huge friendly dogs that are known to be riddled with genetic disorders. And over a few generations, Ishi has used traditional techniques to breed out many troublesome conditions, such as sagging skin and oversized head that makes many of them look goofy. But some recessive conditions like hip dysplasia could not simply be bred away. And so for $1,000, 2 years ago, he built a lab in his backyard shed capable of doing everything from culturing tissue to altering the DNA of canine sperm. Then he began trying to attack his dog breeding problems with genetic engineering, and he's currently experimenting with different ways he might modify the DNA before artificially inseminating the female dogs. And in the early testing, to see whether his methods work, he fused sperm with genes from glowing bacteria in an attempt to genetically engineer glowing puppies. Though the pregnancy failed to take. Undeterred, he is now gearing up to tackle even bigger challenges. But earlier this month, oh, God forbid, when the FDA proposed a new rule that would require any genetically engineered animal to go through strict regulatory procedures. In essence, the FDA wants to define, and good for them, any animal a scientist purposefully genetically modifies as a what? A drug. Well, it's because the FDA's kind of antiquated. They don't really have anything on the books, I don't think, much to deal with genetic engineering organisms or synthetic biology or any of the stuff that DARPA's doing, and we're going to get there as well today. The only way the FDA has to deal with anything is to say it's a good drug or a bad drug. So I guess this is going to be a drug. There was something else that they deemed a drug just recently because they didn't have a definition for it. That means that if a scientist, say, I don't know, creates a cow without horns that are safer to the farm, and they've done that. I've seen cows without their longhorn, right? They got longhorn cows and non-longhorn cows. And I've been reading about that. They were breeding cows without the horns because it's way easier to pack them into railway cars. You can even believe it. This is the honest God truth. Without those big, horrible horns. And so they've been breeding those out of them. I mean, what a horrifying thought that is. This is all the self-directed human evolution that we are going to be wreaking destruction on this planet by allowing us to do this. And it doesn't matter if they put in laws, Germany, FDA, whatever, put in laws and say, hey, you biohackers, these are some people out there that are trying to get a handle as to what is going on. I'd be more worried about the ones that are trying to control this technology that have now taken it and declared it a weapon of mass destruction. Those are the people we need to be concerned about with CRISPR. And I really hope Jennifer Dowda sleeps well at night because this is the Tower of Babylon, our genetic code that is going to completely turn us upside down and screw up any genes that are on this planet from this day forward for our children. You know, you wondered why they had those vaults, the seed vault and the gene. They've been making the genome database. That's how my mother says it, database. Because they're worried. They're worried that we might not be able to, at some point in the future, get back pure, unadulterated DNA for life on Earth. Human, animal, plant, or otherwise. Lock it all up. Take it to Mars. That's what's going to happen to it. It's not going to be for you and me. This is going to be the world of crazy here. Ishii was preparing for a project that sought to cure hyperuricemia in Dalmatians, which is a common liver malfunction that frequently results in kidney stones, bladder stones, or gout. It should be straightforward, he said. Ishii plans to use gene editing with the technique called CRISPR. We know all about CRISPR to correct a single errant nucleotide that causes the condition, reversing the mutation to turn a T, this is the CATG, into the genetic code back into the correct G. And he will use this technique called sperm-mediated gene transfer, which will allow him to transfer his engineered Dalmatian DNA to a female Dalmatian in hopes that maybe a fertilized egg will produce a hyperuricemia-free pup. The animal just got a molecular surgery to fix a broken gene that causes their bladder to explode. And then these animals can become the founders of a generation of healthier Dalmatians. and breathe the disease away in a few years. And I see sunshine and rainbows in the sky's starry eyes, because this is the promise of CRISPR. Sure, flip, 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 flip. Switching them around and flip some switches, we'll make it all better. And that's, of course, what they're promising. But that is not what is happening. Maybe in his little shed in rural Mississippi, it sure is. But not in some of these little rogue labs. In mommy's basement and in North Korean prisons. Or in Chinese labs down deep, dark hallways. It's very scary that you literally could alter an entire lineage for the future from one amino acid switch. Did you hear that? He took a T, snipped it out, and he put in a G. C, A, T, and G. I know taurine and I don't remember what the G is. I used to know all those for biology. But then, if he impregnates that dog, its progeny will now have the new gene sequencing that then can be passed down to its progeny. And under the proposed FDA rules, Ishti can still continue experimenting in a shed. Oh, well, look at that. But if enacted, the rules mean that should Ishii ever sell his Dalmatians, they will be subject to strict regulations. So I could create a Minotaur in my shed, in my backyard, in rural upstate New York. And as long as that Minotaur walks around and helps me clean the house and mow the lawn, nobody cares. The second I go to sell it, though, the FDA is going to want to subject me to strict regulation. Well, that's going to help a lot of stuff, I guess. So when the FDA first published their rules, some scientists freaked out, or people like me got really excited, unwarrantedly worrying that they might make animal genomics unfeasible for anyone other than large, cash-rich corporations. For Ishii, who has not yet decided whether to continue with his experiments, the rule would make the science less accessible. It's regulation to control who can use these new technologies, he says, and how much money they need to have to use them. Not regulation to mitigate any risks. Ishii is not the first biohacker to run into regulatory roadblocks, though. Last month, the FDA intervened after finding that a San Francisco Bay biohacker was selling kits for homebrewers to genetically engineer their own glowing beer. I just saw that story the other day. Questioning whether the green fluorescence protein used to make the beer's yeast glow was a color additive for food that had yet to be recognized as safe for consumption. The creators argue that aside from not being a color, there's little evidence to suggest that there are safety issues. Yeah, oh God. So there's no safety, anything, no regulation, anything. It is anything goes. And at BioHacking Con, which is a biohacker conference in Austin last weekend, so it was the third weekend in January. Could have gone there for my birthday. A frequent topic of concern was how best to approach government regulation. Regulation for implants typically only apply when the implant is considered a quote-unquote medical device. But the magnets and the RFID chips that body hackers gravitate toward and cut into their skin so they can have superpowers do not fall into that category. The FDA has made continuous efforts to better understand the needs of the developer community and has instituted a number of activities aimed at providing assistance to regulated small businesses, says the agency in an emailed statement in views about questions from the biohacker community. And it also added that the agency has a quote unquote number of programs to help small businesses navigate the regulatory system. Oh my God. Until now, though, biohackers have evaded much government suspicion, mainly because they are a tight knit community and they have built up strong self imposed policies of ethics and safety. Oh, yeah, well, we're going to talk about one next. Encouraging people to stick to experiments that are safe for people and the environment. And there are no explicit consequences for not following the rules, but so far, the system seems to have worked. Oh, sure. Now that you know about. At least the community has been small enough and niche enough to avoid attracting the attention of what's one of my favorite phrases, potentially bad actors. Yeah, rogue agents. But the advancing scientific tool and growing DIY bio movement means that some of these projects are moving out of the garage into the consumer world. Odin, this is the one we talked about, sells his DIY beer kit online for $160, along with all kinds of other supplies for easy bake genetic engineering. This is that Odin DIY kit that we even read about months and months ago. Ishii hopes one day to sell his lab perfected pups to others too. And this has amped up some concerns, bringing to a head a long-standing and heated debate over how DIY science should be regulated. DIY scientists argue that imposing more rules will make new technologies less accessible. And many in the scientific community agree that homebrewed biohacking poses little threats. Yeah, but this dude is like genetically engineering dogs already with this little DIY kit. I mean, if he can genetically engineer dogs to have, less hip dysplasia or kidney stones, what else can he do? I mean, honestly, I don't know enough about the technology to be able to judge whether or not the DIY kit is a danger, but just by reading what we've read and the fact that this dog can really make changes, this guy can really make changes in a dog. It's not just E. coli or pond scum that he's making changes to. Really gives me some pause to say, well, these people who are crying, they're crying, and we don't need to be regulated. But I'm not so sure about you. These are the new geeks living in mommy's basement, genetically engineering things to take over the world. Who the hell knows? But I don't think it's such a good idea. Again, I'm not for encroaching government, but something like this seems to me that maybe we should have a bunch of eyes watching what is happening with DIY bioengineering. And maybe you shouldn't be doing it under rocks and in caves where no one knows what you're messing around with. There's a lot of evil people in the world, and there's a lot of technology. We don't quite understand what the ramifications are going to be in the future. Maybe we should put those under lock and key until we understand that a little bit better. Others find it hard to dispel the image of a lone, and this is exactly what I was just envisioning, of a lone scientist in a garage somewhere accidentally creating a deadly pathogen and unleashing it upon the world. And whether or not that scenario is likely, it makes sense that scientists, amateur or not, be subject to some form of oversight when they plan to sell their work to the public. But see, here's the thing. It's even beyond selling. This is what I don't get. It's beyond selling their work to the public, because regardless of if you sell it, if you genetically engineer another extra virulent version of the 1918 flu that wiped out, millions of people worldwide, they've already re-engineered 2 versions that kill like 98% of anyone who gets infected. Let's do number 3 in our garage this time. And hey, I'm not going to sell it. So you shouldn't have to regulate me, right? No, that's bull. Just because you're not selling it doesn't mean that it's A-okay. I don't see any Biolab 4 regulations going on in the shed in rural Mississippi. Where's his face mask? We also discovered that a lot of this stuff, they're not using N95s. They're mixing and matching, splicing and dicing bacteria and viruses in a lab, and that stuff can literally be sucked in through your airwaves. You could become the typhoid Mary. We're not going to get to this today, but while I was gone, I turned some people in chat onto some research that I had stumbled upon accidentally when I was trying to buy some tea at the grocery store. But they're doing some whacked out stuff right now with spores for bacteria. Most bacteria doesn't have spores, but there are a couple bacteria like anthrax that does have spores. But they are now turning these probiotic bacteria into this other type of bacteria with genetic engineering to make them produce spores. And I don't want to get too far into it, but they've been putting this label on all kinds of foods, all kinds of fast foods, like stuff that you never imagined could potentially be ever healthy. But all of a sudden, out of the blue, on your favorite frozen pizza, it says now with probiotics. On your favorite on the shelf tea, now with probiotics. On your favorite sugar cereal, now with probiotics. Pay attention. If you see that, because it made me raise an eyebrow. Remember, I warned you. You start raising an eyebrow, that's something to pay attention to. But I saw it on tea. Now with probiotics, I was like, hey, that's my tea I used to buy years ago. My God, I love this stuff. Hopefully it's not Japanese radioactive. But look, it's got probiotics. It's healthy now. How are they doing that with boiling water? Who cares? I'm out of town. I didn't bring my probiotics. Let's take that one home. Then I got it home. I almost made a cup, but then I got busy. I started looking, and I'm thinking, I'm like, when I get my super greens, when I get them here, I got to make sure they are put into the freezer. They can't be around high heat because it kills all the beneficial bacteria. So how on earth are they not killing all the beneficial probiotics in my tea as I pour a big cup of boiling water into the cup with that tea bag that's supposed to have probiotics? So I start looking at the box. I'm reading it. And they give some name, and I don't remember what the name of the bacteria was, but we're going to dig into this because I saved all that research. And it's got a big TM next to it for trademark. Now, anytime you start seeing something that's like telling you it's healthy, telling you it's a probiotic or some sort of medication or some sort of natural substance like herbs, and they give it some cutesy name and then put a TM next to it, ding, that is something you pay attention to because it is not all natural. It has not come direct from nature. Do not pass go or collect $200. Trademark means that somebody has done something to it in order to claim ownership. So when they tell you that there's a bacteria, a probiotic bacteria with a trademark, that probably means that they've done some genetic modification. Well, I dug, and yep, they did. And they did some really weird things like crossing traits that should be from one kingdom to another. Like one is a fungus, one is a bacteria, but we've mixed them together. So then when you drink the stuff, your intestines, this is how they get around the heat not killing the probiotics, by the way. They've taken this bacteria, they've given it traits of a fungus. They've allowed it to create spores. So the bacterial spores stay as spores in the tea until you ingest it. Now remember, I said there are some bacteria that create spores, most do not. But one that I remember specifically was anthrax. It created spores as a bacteria. But once you ingest these bacterial spores in your tea bag, of course, are labeled with how It now has wonderful probiotics. It's healthy for you. Trademark. What happens is that those spores sit in a nice, warm, dark environment called your intestines. And then, just like any good fungus, it starts to grow out of the spores. So now you have a little fungal farm, trademarked and genetically engineered fungal farm out of bacteria, mind you, that's been genetically engineered and trademarked, growing in your intestines. And I dug way into this bacteria, by the way. It actually replaces the bacteria that is in your gut with the new stuff that you just sucked up from who the hell knows where. Trademarked. And in all kinds of commercial, traditionally non-healthy, nutritional foods. Now, what scares me, and I know I got a little off topic, but this biohacking thing and this completely mad science upside down world is very disturbing because they're going to try and trick us like that Insect Allies program from DARPA. One of our listeners in chat yesterday, I pointed them to that Biological Technologies office that DARPA opened a couple years ago to deal with all their mad science and the crossing the lines of biology and technology. And he found that Insect Allies program, and yes, that is using bacteria to infect insects. And once the insects are infected, and by the way, it's genetically modified bacteria, once the insects are infected, they then set them loose on a crop. As the insects nibble on the live crop, they pass through their spittle the genetically modified bacteria they've been infected with, and it spreads into the plant. And as they nibble on every plant in that field, each of those plants becomes genetically modified while they are growing and alive within one growing season. Guys, there's going to be nowhere to hide. If they can turn bacteria into some sort of mutant crossover with weird fungal features and then use it to seed humans, and hey, I'm going to tell you something else. They have discovered huge connections between gut bacteria and mental health. Gut bacteria and pushing those buttons to be able to control your moods, to be able to control your brain. I'm very frightened when some multinational corporation is creating trademark gut bacteria that doesn't act like gut bacteria. It acts like some other crazy crossover, some other bio weapon like anthrax. Like literally, anthrax is a bacteria that's in spores. That's why it's so hard to kill. That's why when we took a look a couple years ago about the DOD and the CDC, remember all that? We had smallpox sitting on top of filing cabinets and anthrax shipped all over the planet to all these different bases, and they thought it was killed, and whoops, it wasn't. It wasn't killed because anthrax are spores. They were irradiating them, thinking they killed them all, but spores can live millions of years. It's like the ultimate time capsule. Spores will lie dormant until they are activated and can be through lots and lots of inhospitable conditions and still survive on the other end once they get dark, warm, and wet. We will get more into that, though. All right, I went off on a tangent. So be aware, be very aware. I wanted to warn everyone. I don't know if I want to do brand names because they're trademarked, but I might point you in a direction. Maybe I can find one of the stories tomorrow and we can at least read about that bacteria. I won't give any judgment either direction. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Like I said, we're not going to be calling out multi-billion-dollar corporations so they can bring the eyesore out on me. But I'm going to tell you what, I would be proceeding with caution. Anything that you see out there, food-wise, that all of a sudden you start seeing, oh, now with probiotics, question that. and take a look at what kind of probiotics they are. Remember, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is well invested in this newfangled technology called living therapeutics. We read about that in MIT Technology Review quite a number of times now. And that is exactly what the plan was to use genetically modified gut bacteria to be able to cure you. So, like I said, this is the first time I started seeing all this now with probiotics. It just struck me as odd. When I dug a little bit deeper, it's what always happens. I'm like, uh-oh, here it comes, people. So anyway, let's get back to this itchy issue. So for Ishii, the question is whether or not he should be regulated. In fact, he initially reached out to the FDA voluntarily because he takes his hobby very seriously and he wants to do everything possible to ensure that his science is ethical. And yeah, I'm not picking on Ishii. I mean, he sounds like he's a good guy who's trying to make life better for these doggies. Though he was a breeder, and there's still probably too many doggies out there that need homes. But that's all right. He's trying to fix them. But instead, Ishii is concerned that the rules designed without a growing contingent of DIY biology enthusiasts in mind will be so taxing that they render this newly accessible science once again inaccessible to everyone without a fancy degree and a high-end lab. And I think you should have to have a fancy degree, a high-end laboratory, an N95 mask, and nitrile gloves, as well as some sort of little bio level 4 air-proof door with a vacuum pack while you're working on it. You know, they treat these things like this is just child's play, like this is Barbies or Tinker Toys, and it's not. You know, the butterfly effect, what's that called? There's actually a scientific name for that. Flapping butterfly wings. How are you ever going to prove that, you know, that plane crash didn't somewhere along the way all start out with an unfortunate butterfly flap on the other side of the planet that then caused a chain of events to spiral to where that, I don't know, where that flock of ducks got sucked into the engine that then caused the crash. You can't. And so why would you gamble? You know, I like to gamble. I don't win a lot. I don't gamble a lot either, but for the few times that I've been to a casino, it is kind of fun. Video poker. And, you know, you win a couple dollars here and there. It's enough to keep me going. Give me $20 and put me in a corner. I'll be going all night. And free drinks as well. But, you know, I don't think that our planet, you know, maybe these people should go to Mars. They want to terraform Mars, push a button, generate all these new life forms. I think that's a good place for them, or put them over on Alpha Centauri somewhere. I know Stephen Hawking is looking at sending some of those little mini CubeSats to Alpha Centauri. Go hop a ride. You can go practice all you want there. I just don't think it's a good idea to have rogue agents on planet Earth messing around with live animals, trying to see what they create. I mean, what is it going to take before we do have dogs with wings? We have a Cerebus with big glowing red eyes, nasty fangs, and wings. All right, so talking about body hacking, you know, I've kind of gone wishy-washy back and forth, trying to decide whether or not I was going to cover this story. But it is only Tuesday, and it's got an animated GIF at the top of the story that's pretty disturbing. And I don't know. I think we should read this one. It was kind of a tough day of thinking, too many brain chemicals working. So maybe we'll do this one, and then we'll set the stage for tomorrow. This show's not long enough, but guys, I don't think I could do 2 hours a day again. That was just too much. All right, meet the body hacker. This is from February 7th, 2017, so a week ago today. Meet the body hacker trying to become a human vibrator. Now, this is the type of people I'm talking about. Not all of them. Ishi sounded like he had um, some noble project goals, but this dude, this dude really disturbed me. Rich Lee is his name. Rich Lee wants to give you an orgasm called a cyborgasm. And for years, Lee has been beset by a dream to become a human vibrator. Okay, whack job. A bionic man endowed with an implant designed explicitly to bring pleasure. And by upgrading his parts to include a tiny vibrating device implanted just below the skin. Now, again, guys, these are these biohackers. Like, let's cut ourselves. Are these like the old days 80s cutters? Except instead of just cutting yourself, now you're inserting things in there? What? You got a problem. If you find joy or excitement in doing something like this, he also hopes to upgrade himself from the average Utah dad, so anyone who's back out there in Utah, to that of a cyborg era Casanova. Turn it on, and the device will give his male appendage machine powered capabilities that rival some of the most popular sex toys, at least in theory. And he's going to call it, wait for it, the LoveTron 9000. And he doesn't just envision this cybersexual future for himself. Oh, no. He wants to sell it to you, too. Now, come on, guys. Seriously. Lee is a grinder, and that is a member of the niche community of biohackers pushing the limits of what it means to be human by augmenting their bodies with all sorts of synthetic parts. He has tiny magnets implanted into his ear that function as built-in earbuds and other magnets in his fingertips for fun. He also has an implant to sense temperature and another outfitted with near-field communication technology that he uses in conjunction with a text-to-speech app to make his phone read aloud bits of text. And in his most recent experiment, Lee installed tubes of energy-absorbing, non-Newtonian foam under the skin of his leg to act as a sort of built-in shin guard. And oh, whoops, it was a disaster. After flying to California to have two friends with day jobs in the AR install the long, thin tubes of armor in both of his shins. So he had people in a hospital do this. I mean, is that even ethical or legal? You went to an ER, two people that work there, and they like cut you open and put this foam shit in your leg? Come on. And I got more stories too about people injecting themselves. Got to get there. Well, these thin tubes of armor swelled up so much in his legs that the stitches burst. And then the implant was exposed, and every time he stood up, his body was hit with a rush of sharp, tingling pain. And one night in a grisly feat of bravery, he braced for the worst, and he yanked him out himself. Oh, God. He says, quote, "My conception of an ideal self is something like a Mr. Potato Head," unquote. No. All right, so this is the type of person that is going unregulated DIYing shit in their back bedrooms. My point's exactly as to why we do need regulation. And maybe even a large group of people like you and me with oversight. People that have at least a little bit of common sense and go, hey, Mr. Potato Head, it probably isn't such a good idea to be inserting shit into your body that isn't supposed to be there. But still, Mr. Potato Head was not deterred. Some might view Lee's body modification as an obsession, as self-mutilation. But he sees it as self-improvement. Now, guys, Yeah, people with that mutilation disorder have a little bit of a problem upstairs. But don't worry about it, because now we're creating the LoveTron 9000. And that is Lee's riskiest and most ambitious project yet. Documenting his modifications on YouTube. Oh, Lee has turned into a celebrity of sorts. Oh, God. And even among those that count, having bits of electronics implanted inside of their body is fun. Lee's excursions veer toward the extreme, you think? But he is betting that will not be the case forever. He foresees a world in the not too distant future where the average person has implants that'll do everything from unlock their front door. Yeah, Regina Duggan had talked about that. Give us their superpowers. To, yes, improving their sex life. Well, thank you. I'll wait for the Orgasmatron 9000 booth. It's horrible. So, anyway, the author of the story actually met Lee last month at the second annual BioHacking Con in Austin, that one that happened the third week in January, where hundreds had gathered to see early versions of this future on display. And on the runway, models showed off new fashions that meant to bestow new senses, among them giving them direction or echolocation. And in the exhibit hall, multiple booths offered implant magnets and RFID chips on the spot. And one booth also offered high-tech manicures that embedded LED lights and chips into sparkly acrylic nails. A fellow cyborg, the Canadian filmmaker Rob Spence, gave a presentation on his quest to transform himself into an eyeborg after losing an eye in a hunting accident and replacing it with an analog camera. None of the wearables or implants on display, though, went quite as far as Lee's vision for the LoveTron 9000 cybernetic penis. Next year, Lee hopes that the LoveTron 9000 might have its own booth at the conference, too, and he plans to market the implant to consumers in a hope that it might become the next IT sex toy, selling it via the LoveTron website directly to consumers who can then have the device implanted by a piercer or a body modification artist from off of his company's pre-approved website. The procedure is relatively non-invasive, and it would likely skirt regulatory approval. But I'll tell you what, somewhere in here when I was reading, and it's a pretty long story, and I don't want to read about Lee's implants anymore, but Lee's wife, ex-wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, is not very happy about this, and she apparently has taken the kids and said that Lee is a danger to himself and others or something along those lines. He's pretty scary, and I would have to second that. It's kind of a scary thought if you would do something like that to yourself. You really don't want to be teaching that to your children. And here, this is where we're going to end this up, but we could kick off here tomorrow. One man's quest to hack his own genes. Brian Hanley set out to test a gene therapy, and he started with himself January 10th, 2017, in a dream that Brian Hanley told me, the author, about. He is riding on a bus when he meets a dark man in leather clothing. And the next thing he knows, this is pretty disturbing, he is being splayed across a tiled metal bed and being electrocuted. This dream was no doubt connected to the events that actually took place last June in a plastic surgeon's office in Davis, California. Hey, isn't that where UC Davis is, where they're doing all the genetic engineering on the cows? I believe so. That's also where Jennifer Dowd is and CRISPR. And at Hanley's request, a doctor had injected into his thigh copies of a gene that Hanley himself, a PhD microbiologist, had designed and then ordered from a research supply company online. And then plunging 2 pointed electrodes into his leg, the doctor had passed a strong electrical current into his body, causing his muscle cells to open and then absorb this newfangled designer DNA that he designed. Oh my goodness. The effort is actually the second case that MIT Technology Review has documented of unregulated gene therapies. A risky undertaking that is being embraced by a few daring individuals seeking to develop anti-aging treatments. And yes, we read about that woman back a few months ago. Like I said, I think that was one where she was trying to lengthen telomeres. And then we also read about the Russian who took the 35 million year old or 3 million year old bacteria found out of Lake Vostok and injected himself. Well, this dude's number 3. The gene Handley added to his muscle cells would make his body produce a more potent hormone, potentially increasing his strength, stamina, and lifespan. Hanley is 60, and he is the founder of a one-man company called Butterfly Sciences, also in Davis, California. And after encountering little interest from investors for his idea about using injections of DNA to strengthen H patients, he determined that maybe he should be the first to try it himself. Most gene therapies involve high-tech, multi-million-dollar experiments carried out by large teams at top medical centers with an eye to correcting illnesses like hemophilia. But Hanley showed that gene therapy can also be carried out on the cheap in the same setting as a liposuction or a nose job and might one day be easily accessible to anyone. Well, to pull off his experiment, he needed to show that things would work, and he actually got some help from good old Georgie Porgy